Hey everyone. Tonight we begin with something a little softer, a little quieter, just like the streets of Maplewood, Oregon at 7 a.m. Imagine this. I'm sitting by my apartment window, watching the morning stir to life. People bustle down the sidewalk, juggling coffee cups, backpacks, grocery bags, living like they're running out of time. And there I am, still in my robe, fingers curled around a warm mug of tea, wondering when my phone will ring again, wondering if my son remembers I exist. You might not survive this one, not because it's terrifying, but because it's achingly familiar, that hollow ache of being needed only when it's convenient. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and local time. I always love knowing where we're all sitting together tonight. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe let a fan run for some gentle white noise. And let's begin tonight's journey together. Maplewood used to be the kind of town where everybody knew your name and waved at your front porch. But in the last few years, it's been changing. High-rise condos, yoga cafes with oat milk lattes, and shiny new townhomes swallowing up the old charm. My son Brian calls it market evolution, says it's great for property values. I call it noise. I've lived here 42 years, taught math at the local high school for 35 of them, raised my son alone in a rented 2-bedroom that leaked in the winter and baked in the summer. I was never the PTA mom, never the polished hostess with a casserole in the oven, but I was there, always there. Brian usually calls on Sundays, like clockwork, between 9 and 10 a.m. It's less of a chat and more of a checkbox. Call mom, 10 minutes. This week, nothing. No call, no text, not even a ghost of a voicemail. I took it in stride, sort of. I've made a habit of dressing loneliness up in soft sweaters and calling it independence. When I was younger, loneliness scared me. I thought it would swallow me whole. Now, at 77, it's more like background music, an old record I don't bother turning off. I stood up and shuffled over to my bookshelf, pulled out the old photo box, Brian as a toddler with a chocolate ice cream mustache, Brian at high school graduation, looking so much like his father it made my stomach twist. His father never knew he had a son. He was a visiting architect working on the Maplewood Library redesign. Smart, smooth, Boston accent. He left town before I could even tell him I was pregnant. I didn't chase him. Pride maybe, fear definitely. When the school principal found out, he threatened to fire me. Unwed and pregnant in a small town scandal. But they needed math teachers, and I was a good one. They kept me on one condition, that I become a model of morality. I agreed. I always agreed back then. I worked 2 jobs, taught during the day, tutored at night, slept 4 hours, drank too much tea, and told Brian bedtime stories about space and sea monsters instead of his father. He was a bright kid. He read early, loved numbers like I did. I was proud of him. Still am, sometimes. The kettle screamed from the kitchen. I poured my tea and went back to the window. Across the street, a little park had filled with kids and strollers. I spotted Chloe, my granddaughter, laughing with friends. She didn't see me. I never called out. At 19, she'd be mortified to know Grandma was spying from the 2nd floor. The phone rang, and I spilled tea on my lap. Typical. The caller ID read Allison Lane Bryan's wife. Sunshine on the phone. Vinegar in person. "Hi, Martha," she chirped. "How are you feeling?" "Fine, thank you." Brian's stuck at a home showing, but he asked me to call. "We're having a family dinner Friday at 7. You're coming, right?" It wasn't a question. I nodded instinctively, though she couldn't see it. "Of course. Can I bring anything?" "Oh, no. No, just yourself." She laughed an empty, brittle laugh. "We have important news." When she hung up, I sat there staring at the phone. Important news. Probably a promotion. Or maybe Peter, my grandson, had finally passed the bar. Or maybe they were buying a house. That would explain the sudden invitation. I knew they were saving, though never quite saving enough. Brian always said it was hard selling homes when you didn't own one yourself. He thought it made him look weak in front of clients. I opened my laptop, my little secret. No one in the family knew I'd become pretty decent with computers. When I retired, I took courses at the community college, at first just to kill time, but then I found the stock market. At 62, I put $1,000 into a little game. At 65, it had grown to $15,000. At 72, I crossed $40,000. Nothing flashy, just steady. I liked the numbers. They made sense. People didn't always make sense. Numbers did. That day, I checked my portfolio. One stock, a biotech company I'd bought into 3 years ago, had jumped again. I'd put $5,000 into it when shares were $5. Now they were at $28 and climbing. I Googled a new Alzheimer's drug, successful trial, big headlines, big money. My $5,000 was now worth $28,000, maybe more. I did the math. Of course, if the trend held, well, it could be the start of something massive. But what should I do? Sell now and pocket the win? Or wait and see? I closed the laptop. No decisions tonight. I had tea to finish and bags to pack. Because whether they remembered it or not, I was still grandma, and I'd promised to babysit Chloe while Brian and Allison went to a charity gala. Chloe wasn't a kid anymore, but they still insisted she needed supervision. She's dreamy, Allison had said, a bit unreliable. I disagreed. Chloe wasn't unreliable. She just didn't conform. That made her more like me than they wanted to admit. I grabbed my coat and headed for the bus stop. Allison had offered a cab, but I liked the bus. I liked watching people, catching snippets of strangers' conversations, feeling like part of something even if it wasn't mine. The bus was on time. 20 minutes later, I was ringing their apartment buzzer. Chloe opened the door with headphones around her neck, cell phone in hand. "Hi, Grandma." She kissed my cheek and let me in. Brian and Allison were almost ready. Brian pacing on the phone, Allison fluffing her hair in the mirror. "Mom," Brian said, hanging up. "Thanks for coming. We'll be back around 11. "No problem. Have fun." Allison gave Chloe one last warning. No friends, no parties, chemistry test, remember? "Yes. Mother," Chloe sighed. When they left, she collapsed onto the couch. "Want to watch a movie? I can make tea." "I'd love some," I said, settling in beside her. We talked, we laughed. She asked questions no one ever asked me, about my childhood, about being a mom, about life. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt seen. After Chloe brought out 2 steaming mugs of tea, she settled next to me on the couch with a softness I hadn't felt from anyone in my family in years. "So, Grandma," she said, pulling her knees up under her, "what was it like raising Dad alone?" I blinked. That wasn't a question anyone ever asked me, not Brian, not Allison, not even the school counselor back when Brian started acting out in 8th grade. I took a slow sip of tea and let the warmth fill my chest before answering. It was hard. I said simply, but it was also my purpose. I didn't have a choice, so I got on with it. 2 jobs, very little sleep, not much of a social life. "Did you love it?" I smiled faintly. Not all the time, but I loved him. And that made the rest worth it. She nodded like she understood something bigger than words could explain. "I think that's why I don't trust people who make life look easy." I added, "Hard lives are honest. They don't need polish." Chloe glanced sideways at me, her face thoughtful. "Is that why you and Mom don't get along?" I laughed softly, among other things. She chuckled too, and for a second, I saw a mirror me at 19, bold and curious, eager to crack open the world. Only difference was, I never had anyone to ask questions to. "Can I tell you something?" she said, "but you have to promise not to tell anyone." "Cross my heart," I replied, making the old X across my chest. I don't think I want to stay in college, she whispered. I blinked. Really? I hate it. I mean, I like psychology and literature, but the business classes, they make me want to cry. Dad wants me to major in finance. He says it's smart and secure, but I want something more, live. That's not a crime, I said, reaching for her hand. It's just inconvenient for people who want to live through you. Her eyes welled up. You're the first person who said that. We sat in silence for a moment, her thumb absently tracing the rim of her teacup. The television hummed in the background, but neither of us noticed anymore. You know, I added after a pause, I used to want to travel the world. Paris, Morocco, Nepal. I had clippings from magazines, little dreams taped to the inside of my closet. What happened? I exhaled through my nose. Life, Brian, bills, fear. I buried that version of myself in a drawer and never opened it again. Until now, Chloe said quietly. Maybe, I murmured. We watched a movie, something light and forgettable. We ordered pizza and giggled like two teenagers hiding from their parents. For those few hours, I wasn't a tired grandmother or a forgotten mother. I was just a woman, rediscovering who she used to be. Around 10:45, I heard keys in the lock. Chloe sighed and quickly sat up straighter. Brian and Allison walked in, faces flushed and tipsy from too much wine and not enough food. Everything okay, Brian asked, scanning the room like a detective. Just fine, I said, standing to collect my coat. We had pizza and watched an old Meg Ryan movie. Allison wrinkled her nose. Pizza. Chloe shrugged. We didn't burn the house down. Lucy, Brian said, upstairs. Big day tomorrow. Night, Grandma. She gave me a long hug. Thank you. For what? For everything, she whispered. I kissed her forehead. Anytime, sweetheart. As I slipped on my coat, Brian cleared his throat. Don't forget, dinner this Friday. It's important. I remember, I said, already halfway out the door. The air outside was brisk and smelled like cut grass and damp pavement. I walked to the bus stop, letting the night settle over me like a favorite blanket. That evening had awakened something old, but not lost, a sense of possibility, a sense of me. Back in my apartment, I poured a glass of water and sat by the window again. The park was empty now. Streetlights buzzed faintly. Maplewood. Asleep. I opened my laptop, logged into my portfolio, and refreshed the page. The biotech stock had risen again, $31 per share. I grabbed a notepad and did the math. I had 1,000 shares. That was $31,000. Not bad for an old math teacher. Not bad at all. But then the phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Is this Martha Benson? Yes. My name is Edward Gillespie. I represent Atlas Investments. You hold shares in Nuvera Biotech. Correct. My spine straightened. Yes, I do. I'm calling to inform you that as of this evening, Nuvera is being acquired by Medexa Pharmaceuticals in a deal valued at $5.2 billion. All shares will be purchased at $500 each. I choked on my own breath. Excuse me? $500 per share. You own 1,000. That's $500,000. The room spun. My knees went soft. I sank into the chair like someone pulled the strings out of me. Are you sure? I managed to whisper. Completely. You'll receive documentation to confirm the transaction by week's end. If you'd like, I can guide you through the tax planning process. I scribbled down his number, thanked him in a daze, and hung up. 500,000. $500,000. I stared at the laptop screen, now glowing like a portal to a new life. I could do anything, go anywhere, be someone again. I thought about Brian, about Allison, about Chloe. I thought about what I wanted for once, not what they expected. And then I laughed. Not a sad laugh, but something deeper, warmer, the sound of possibility breaking the surface. This time, I wasn't going to let fear stop me. This time, I wasn't going to play it safe. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. It was still quiet, one of those rare, still moments before the world remembers it has things to do. I shuffled into the kitchen, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat down at the table with a legal pad. $500,000. Even writing it down felt surreal. For most of my life, money was a source of tension, not freedom. Every dollar had a purpose: rent, food, school supplies, the occasional emergency root canal. Now, for the first time in my 77 years, I had money that didn't belong to someone else's crisis. I wrote 2 columns, what I want and what they want. It wasn't hard to fill in their side. Brian and Allison had made it clear they wanted my apartment sold, and the proceeds funneled into a down payment on their dream home. Their dream, not mine. On my side, I wrote, see the Eiffel Tower, wake up near the ocean, learn to garden, eat something I can't pronounce, live somewhere with space for books, pay for Chloe's future if she needs it. I paused. Those weren't dreams anymore, they were options. Before I could spiral into sentiment, my phone buzzed. Brian again. I didn't pick up. Instead, I texted, I'll see you Friday. Please don't call until then. I need space. A few minutes later, he responded, understood. Love you. Mom? Love, huh? I closed my phone, folded up the list, and tucked it inside my old cookbook, the one with flour smudges and half-torn pages. My secret treasure map. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called a real estate agent. Not Brian's agency. I wasn't about to dance around those awkward conversations or give anyone in that office a reason to gossip. I called a woman named Tessa Byrne, someone recommended in a community Facebook group I followed quietly under a pseudonym. Everyone said she was discreet, professional, and most importantly, not connected to my son. Is Byrne, I asked after she picked up. Yes, this is Tessa. I'm looking to buy a home, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Something small, comfortable, quiet, maybe with a garden. There was a pause, then her voice turned warm. I'd be honored to help you find it. By noon, we had an appointment scheduled for the following Tuesday. I didn't tell Chloe, not yet. This was still mine to hold close. That afternoon, I went for a walk. I stopped at the little French cafe near the college campus, somewhere I used to avoid because it always felt too expensive, too young. I ordered a pain au chocolat and a café au lait and sat by the window, watching students stream past with backpacks and ambition. It hit me then, like a whisper under my breath. I wasn't old. Not really. I was just uninvited. There's a difference. On the way home, I passed the travel agency. I hadn't noticed it in years. It was squeezed between a vape shop and a nail salon, probably one of the last old-school travel offices still operating. I stepped inside. A bell chimed, and a woman with a silver bob and pearl earrings looked up. Can I help you? I'm not sure, I said, but I think I'm planning an adventure. She smiled like she knew exactly what I meant. We talked for an hour. She showed me brochures, places I'd only seen on postcards and PBS documentaries. I asked about senior tours, solo travel safety, and language barrier tricks. I want something different, I told her. I want to wake up somewhere that doesn't smell like my past. She nodded slowly. That's a beautiful way to put it. I left with a few glossy pamphlets tucked under my arm: Greece, Portugal, Japan, and the feeling that something irreversible had begun. Back at home, I opened my laptop again. The brokerage portal showed a pending transfer, $500,000 arriving Friday. I hovered my mouse over the logout button and whispered, "Thank you, math." I owed a lot to numbers. They had never lied to me. People did. But numbers? They always made sense. I spent the rest of the evening writing. Not anything important, just little memory fragments, thoughts, maybe ideas for letters I'd never send. One line stood out on the page. You can either inherit a life or invent one. And I was done inheriting. That night, I cooked myself a real dinner pan-seared salmon, wild rice, steamed broccoli, even poured a glass of Chardonnay. It felt ceremonial, like I was toasting a new version of myself. I ate in silence, thinking of Chloe, of how her face lit up when she spoke about poetry, of how her hands trembled when she admitted her doubts. I didn't know yet what I would do with the money. Not exactly, but I knew what I wouldn't do with it. I wasn't going to buy Brian and Allison a house. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let them tuck me away in a care facility like a piece of furniture that no longer matched the decor. When Friday came, I'd have more than just money, I'd have a choice. And maybe, just maybe, that would be the beginning of everything. Friday came sooner than I expected. I woke up that morning with a strange energy, half anticipation, half something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't dread, it wasn't fear. It felt like standing on a dock, suitcase in hand, waiting for a boat to appear on the horizon. The boat might take me somewhere beautiful or nowhere at all, but either way, I was ready. The first thing I did, of course, was check my bank account. There it was, $500,000, just sitting there like it had always belonged to me. I stared at the number for a long time. My fingers hovered over the mouse pad like they expected confetti to explode from the screen. Instead, I felt calm. It was real. The money, the moment, my power. I made tea, opened the windows, and let in the breeze. I wore my navy blue dress, the one with the delicate sleeves and the tiny pearl buttons. I hadn't worn it in years. Not since Chloe's high school graduation. I added a silver bracelet and spritzed on the perfume I usually save for holidays. It smelled like jasmine and citrus, with just a trace of rose. Something alive, something feminine. At 5:30, I called a cab. I could have taken the bus, sure, but tonight wasn't about routine. Tonight, I wanted to glide in like a mystery, a woman with her own story, her own plans. Brian's neighborhood always felt a little too polished, like everything had been chosen to impress the next person walking by. The lawn was perfectly trimmed, the flower pots color coordinated. It was a place where wild things were tamed, where laughter came in decibels deemed appropriate by the HOA. I arrived right at 6:10 as requested. Allison opened the door with a wide smile too wide. "Charlotte, you look amazing," she said, stepping back to let me in. "That dress is so flattering." "Thank you," I said, stepping past her into the familiar entryway. "It still fits, surprisingly." Brian was in the living room, pouring glasses of something sparkling. "Hey, Mom," he said with the kind of forced cheer that never quite sat right on him. "Glad you made it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, accepting a glass. Chloe waved from the couch, Grandma. She looked lovely. As always, soft sweater, jeans, barefoot, book in hand. She had her mother's cheekbones and her father's frown lines, but all the warmth came from somewhere else. "Hey, darling," I said, kissing the top of her head. "I've missed you." Dinner smelled delicious roast chicken, rosemary potatoes, some kind of elaborate salad with goat cheese and walnuts. Allison was always meticulous with meals, especially when something was on the line. We sat down at the dining table, which had been set with new china white with a silver rim, the kind you buy for special announcements. I took a slow sip of water and waited. Sure enough, Brian raised his glass. "Before we eat, I want to thank everyone for being here. Tonight is about family and the future." Here it comes, I thought. He glanced at Allison, who gave a subtle nod. Then he looked back at me. "We've decided to move forward with the house on Havenwood Drive," he said, "the Victorian with the wraparound porch." I nodded, unsurprised. "It's the perfect place for us," Allison chimed in. "Room for Chloe, a home office for Brian, even a guest suite. In case we have visitors," Brian added quickly, giving me a significant look. "How lovely," I said, keeping my voice even. There's just one thing, Allison said. The down payment's a bit of a stretch. And we were hoping, Brian said, setting down his glass, that you'd consider helping us, just until we get through closing. There it was, served up right between the rosemary potatoes and the guilt. How much, I asked, cutting into my chicken. Brian hesitated. Well, the asking price is $480,000. We've saved about $120,000. So we'd need $200,000 for the down payment. Just a loan, of course, Allison said quickly, with interest. You'd be helping us build a legacy. I looked at Chloe, who was studying her plate a little too intently. And what happens to me, I asked. What do you mean? Brian looked genuinely puzzled. If I give you $200,000, I said, placing my fork down, what happens to my life, my apartment, my security? We've actually been thinking about that, Allison said, clasping her hands together. We found a place. It's called Sunhaven. It's beautiful, like a resort, really. A resort, of course. It's not a nursing home, Brian said quickly. It's a retirement community with staff and activities and other people your age. They even have Tai Chi. I almost laughed. Tai Chi, as if that could cancel out being exiled. We figured, Allison continued, you could sell your apartment, use part of it to fund your stay, and we'd use the rest for the house. And when the money runs out, I asked, in 3 years, 4. We'd figure something out, Brian said. They always had a plan for later. A vague, we'll figure it out, that usually meant I'd be someone else's problem when the time came. You've really thought this through, I said. It's what's best for everyone, Allison said sweetly. For everyone, I echoed. We finished dinner in awkward silence. Chloe cleared the table while Allison served the store-bought pie, and Brian pretended not to notice my clenched jaw. When it was time to go, Chloe hugged me hard. Come over tomorrow, she whispered. Maybe, I said softly. Let's see. Brian walked me to the door. Please think about it. Mom, we can't do this without your help. I turned to him and said, Mibkiyaha, you already have everything planned, but you forgot one thing. What's that? That I have a plan, too. He blinked, confused. Good night, Brian. I walked out into the night air, head held high, the weight of the evening settling around me like a cloak I didn't ask to wear. But under that cloak, something was stirring, something unshakable. Tomorrow, I'd begin again. The next morning, I stood in front of my window, tea in hand, watching a jogger pass by with a golden retriever bouncing beside her. I wasn't sure what disturbed me more, Brian's tone when he talked about helping the family, or the way Allison kept calling the retirement community a resort, like she expected me to be thrilled about bingo night and low-sodium casseroles. It wasn't the lack of gratitude that bothered me. Gratitude is too fleeting to depend on. It was the certainty in their voices, as if my life belonged to their spreadsheet. I had choices, and more importantly, I had $500,000 in my account. Still, I hadn't told them that. I didn't owe them an explanation. Not yet. By noon, I'd finished reading over the documents Edward Gillespie had sent from the brokerage. Everything checked out. The funds were mine, the tax implications were manageable, and my investments surprisingly had triggered a few calls from other firms looking to poach me. I chuckled at the idea of a 77-year-old woman being considered a high-value investor. I packed a small overnight bag and headed downtown. Chloe had texted asking if we could meet at her favorite cafe. I was glad she'd reached out. Despite the chaos, Chloe's affection remained genuine. The cafe was nestled between a used bookstore and a florist that always smelled like carnations and lavender. I spotted Chloe near the back, already sipping on something iced and covered in foam. You look sharp. Grandma, she said, as I slid into the seat across from her. Love the earrings. I touched the pearls lightly. A little armor. You never know when you'll be ambushed by well-meaning family members. She laughed. They're still hoping you'll change your mind. I figured. She paused, sipping her drink. Are you okay? Actually, I said, leaning back in the chair, I'm more than okay. I've made some decisions. Chloe leaned in. Tell me everything. I'm not going to Sunhaven. Good. She said it so quickly, so firmly. It made my heart warm. And I'm not giving them my apartment or my money. Chloe let out a breath of relief. Thank God. I'm buying myself a house, I said, watching her expression shift from curiosity to delight. Nothing fancy, just something with a garden and space for a few bookshelves. I love that, she said, her eyes shining. Where? I was thinking somewhere in South Hill, quiet, green, near that bakery you like. Her face lit up. Wait, are you serious? That's perfect. You'll finally have a real backyard. And, I added, once I'm settled in, I thought I might take a trip. Her eyes widened. Where? Europe, maybe France, Italy, Greece. I paused. Everywhere I used to dream about. Chloe looked stunned. Grandma, that's incredible. I shrugged. I've spent my whole life taking care of people. I think it's time I take care of myself. She reached for my hand. I'm so proud of you. I squeezed her fingers. You sound like you're about to cry. I am, she admitted with a laugh. Happy tears, mostly. We talked for over an hour. She told me how stifling college had become, how she felt like she was walking someone else's path, how photography made her feel alive, even if no one else understood it. You should do it, I told her. Change majors, take that photography class, follow your instincts. But what if Dad? Your dad's not living your life. Sweetheart, don't wait until you're 77 to do something for yourself. She nodded slowly. You really think I can? I don't think, I said, finishing the last sip of my tea. I know. That evening, back home, I opened my laptop and searched real estate listings. South Hill had several promising options, but one immediately caught my eye, a 2-bedroom cottage with a wraparound porch, wildflower garden, and a tiny library nook. The pictures showed sunlight streaming through lace curtains, a fireplace surrounded by built-in bookshelves, and a deep bathtub I could already imagine soaking in with lavender salts and a book in hand. I sent an inquiry to the agent, then closed my laptop and leaned back. This was happening. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was steering the ship. Later that night, just as I was brushing my teeth, my phone buzzed with a text. Brian, Mom, we really need to talk. Can we do dinner tomorrow? I stared at the message. He hadn't called me Mom without a string attached in years. I'm busy tomorrow, maybe next week. He responded almost immediately. Brian, it's important. Allison baked your favorite pie. We're hoping you'll reconsider. Of course, bribery by dessert. I'll think about it. And I would, but not for the reasons he thought. I had something to say, but not yet. Let them sweat a little. Let them wonder what the old woman was up to in her quiet little apartment with her sensible shoes and her strong black tea. They didn't know I'd already picked out a house. And they certainly didn't know that I had no intention of being part of their calculations ever again. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Dreamed of cobblestone streets and waves crashing against distant shores. And of standing in a garden, wildflowers swaying in the breeze, knowing for the first time in decades, this life, it's mine now. I spent most of Saturday morning preparing to meet Veronica, the real estate agent who had quickly responded to my inquiry. She sounded young, bright, and pleasantly surprised that I wanted to pay in full, no mortgage, no inspections, just a clean, honest transaction. As I waited at the curb for her car to arrive, I felt a flutter of excitement, the kind I hadn't felt since the day I held Chloe for the first time in the hospital. It's funny how life keeps offering you new beginnings, even when you think all the doors have closed. Veronica pulled up in a dark blue SUV and stepped out wearing a blazer that looked one size too big and shoes that had clearly walked too many miles. She greeted me with a warm smile. "You must be Ms. Walker." "That's me," I said, "but let's go with Rosemary." She grinned. "I like that. Hop in. I've got 3 houses I think you'll love, starting with the one you spotted online." The ride through South Hill was surprisingly nostalgic. I'd walked these sidewalks for decades, but now, every garden and porch swing felt like a promise. The first house, the one I'd seen online, was even lovelier in person. A creamy yellow cottage with lilac bushes out front and a porch swing already gently creaking in the breeze. "I told the owners to expect an offer," Veronica said as we stepped inside, "but I didn't tell them you'd be making it on the spot." The floors were polished hardwood. The kitchen was compact but charming, and the nook by the window was perfect for my reading chair. The master bedroom faced the garden, where a winding stone path led to a wooden bench shaded by 2 flowering dogwoods. I stood in the center of the living room, letting the light fall across my face, and I knew, "This is it," I whispered. "You sure?" Veronica asked, surprised by how quickly I'd decided. "I've spent a lifetime second-guessing," I said. "This time, I trust my gut." We signed the papers that afternoon. By Monday, I was making arrangements to move out of my apartment. I didn't tell Brian, I didn't tell Allison, I didn't even tell Chloe yet. This moment was mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't asking permission or seeking approval. I was simply living. I hired movers, arranged for furniture delivery, and transferred my utilities. I packed only what mattered: my books, my photographs, the quilt my grandmother made by hand in 1947, and my favorite tea kettle. Everything else I left behind. I had the movers deliver a note with the apartment keys. "Dear Brian, I've moved. The apartment has been sold. No forwarding address yet. Love, Mom." It was petty, maybe, but it also felt like the closing of a chapter. The new house smelled like cedar and lemon-scented wood polish. I spent the first night there alone, sitting on the porch swing with a blanket over my legs and a cup of chamomile in my hands, watching the fireflies blink like secrets in the dark. The quiet was no longer a hollow echo. It was a companion. And yet, by Tuesday afternoon, I found myself missing Chloe. So I sent her a text, "I have something to show you. Come by after class." Her reply was immediate. "Chloe, on my way. Do you need me to bring anything?" Just yourself. And maybe an appetite. I'm ordering Thai." She arrived at 6:15, her eyes wide as she pulled into the gravel driveway. "Oh my God," she said as she stepped out of the car. "Grandma, is this yours?" "It is." I smiled. "Want the tour?" We walked through every room. She gasped at the sunroom, squealed at the clawfoot tub, and sighed at the garden. "This is amazing," she said as we sat down at the small kitchen table with steaming boxes of curry and noodles. "I can't believe you did this." "I can," I said. "I just didn't know I had it in me." "You've always had it in you," she replied. "Maybe now you just believe it too." We ate until we were full, and then sat on the porch swing as the sun set behind the trees. "You know," Chloe said quietly, "I've been thinking about something." "Let me guess, changing your major." She looked at me, surprised. "How did you know?" "I've known you since the day you were born," I said, brushing a leaf off her shoulder, "and I know the sound of someone suffocating in someone else's dream." She sighed. "I hate business school. I keep thinking about photography, or maybe social work, something that feels more me." "Then do it," I said simply. "It's your life. My parents won't be happy. They'll get over it, or they won't. But you'll be living the life you want." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Would you really help me if I switch?" "I'd be honored." We sat in silence for a while after that, watching the stars wink into view one by one. "I wish I could live here," she whispered. "You're always welcome," I replied, "but for now, let's make a plan." You find a new program you love, I'll cover the costs. You focus on becoming who you want to be." She looked at me, eyes glassy with emotion. "Thank you, Grandma." "I believe in second chances," I told her, "and third ones, and fourth." She laughed. "You're a softie." "I'm a realist," I said, "but with a soft blanket and good tea." Later, after she'd gone, I sat in the living room and stared at the walls I now called mine. I felt peaceful, grounded, powerful. That night, I slept without waking once. No dreams, just rest. Like my body finally knew I was safe. Like it knew the storm had passed. And the road ahead? It was mine to choose. The following week passed in a gentle rhythm. Mornings were for tending the garden, watering the azaleas, trimming the lavender, and marveling at the slow but certain spread of ivy along the wooden fence. Afternoons I spent reading in the sunroom, sipping hibiscus tea with a cinnamon stick and lemon peel, like a makeshift potion for clarity. Every now and then, I'd peek at my investment dashboard, not obsessively, just enough to feel the pulse of my account. The biotech stock had held steady, still hovering in the stratosphere, still very much real, and with it, the reality of choice. I had the freedom to move, to rest, to give, or simply to be. One particular Thursday, just as I was contemplating whether to try baking scones for the first time in a decade, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I found Chloe standing there with a pink duffel bag, a camera slung around her neck, and her cheeks flushed from the walk. "Hey," she said with a breathless smile. "I told them I needed some time away. Is it okay if I stay a few days?" My heart leapt. Of course it is. She stepped inside and dropped her bag by the door. "Also," she said, pulling out a manila envelope, "I submitted my request to switch majors. I'm meeting with the new department head on Monday." I beamed. "That's wonderful news." "They weren't happy," she added quickly, "but I told them this was my decision, not theirs." I walked to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set 2 mugs on the counter. "They'll survive," I said. "And if they don't, you'll survive without their approval. That's a hard truth to swallow, but it's also the most freeing." She smiled, her shoulders softening. "I think I'm finally starting to believe that." As we sipped tea on the porch later that evening, she began telling me about the photos she wanted to take documentary-style portraits of people in small towns, their stories, their routines, their quiet brilliance. I listened, captivated, as she spoke with a spark I hadn't seen in her for years, not since she used to collect vintage postcards and stick them to her bedroom wall with washi tape, dreaming out loud of places far from home. "Maybe," she said, "I could start here, with you." "Me?" "Yeah." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "You've got a story. Grandma, a big one. You raised a child on your own, taught for decades, survived heartbreak, built a secret fortune, moved into a dream house at 77. I chuckled. "You make it sound more epic than it is." "It is epic," she insisted. "You just don't see it because you lived it, but I think people need to hear stories like yours, not flashy ones, real ones." That night, she took a photo of me on the porch, my hand wrapped around a mug, my gaze lost in the dusk. I didn't smile, but I wasn't frowning either, just existing peacefully. Later, as I turned off the lights and slipped into bed, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Hair like silver threads spun fine, wrinkles that had earned their keep, eyes that still watched the world with curiosity. Not young, but certainly not done. Friday morning brought a surprise in the form of a letter, a real one. Envelope, stamp, handwriting. I recognized it instantly, my sister June. We hadn't spoken in over 10 years. I sat on the porch and opened the envelope with cautious fingers. "Dearest Rosemary, word travels faster than expected even in sleepy places like South Burlington. I heard you moved, bought yourself a house, that you're happy. I'm writing not to pry, but to reconnect. We're not getting any younger, and I find myself missing things I used to scoff at. Your laugh, your stories, our mother's lemon bars that always turned out dry. If you ever want to talk, I'm still at the same number. June. I stared at the note, emotions prickling the back of my eyes. We hadn't fought, not exactly, just drifted, the way sisters sometimes do when grief wedges itself between them and never quite lets go. I folded the letter, tucked it into my recipe book, and decided to call her tomorrow. Today was for Chloe. We spent the afternoon photographing people at the local farmers market. She snapped portraits while I asked questions. It was a good team effort. She had the lens. I had the rapport. A woman who made honey from backyard bees. A retired truck driver who now sold birdhouses shaped like tiny lighthouses. A couple in their 80s who still held hands while picking vegetables. Everyone has something extraordinary in their ordinary, Chloe said later. You just have to look long enough. That evening, while making dinner rosemary roasted chicken with lemon and thyme, I caught her humming. She was happy. And I, surprisingly, was too. After dinner, we sat under the stars again. I've been thinking, Chloe said suddenly, when I finish this semester, maybe I'll take a gap year, travel a bit, shoot stories abroad. You should, I said without hesitation. Would you come with me? Not the whole year, but maybe a month, Paris, Venice. I laughed. You're trying to tempt an old lady with dreams I gave up decades ago. But you didn't give them up, she said. You just pressed pause. I looked at her, really looked at her. If she was brave enough to unpause her life, maybe I could do the same. All right, I said, Paris, but only if we find a cafe with really good croissants. She squealed and hugged me. And in that moment, I realized something no stock gain or new house could ever offer. This was the true wealth I had forgotten I had. Time. Connection. A second chance not just for me, but for someone I loved. Saturday mornings had their own rhythm in the new house. I'd open the curtains just enough to let the sun tease its way in. Chloe was still asleep in the guest room, and I let her be. She'd earned her rest. I brewed a pot of chicory coffee, the kind I'd learned to love when I visited New Orleans decades ago for a math conference of all things. It was thick, bitter, and oddly comforting. A reminder that even the sharpest flavors can become a comfort if paired with good memories. By mid-morning, Chloe emerged, hair a mess, hoodie falling off one shoulder. "Morning, Grandma," she mumbled, flopping into a chair. "Morning, sunshine," I grinned, sliding a plate of toasted bagels her way. "Hope you're hungry." She smiled through a yawn. Always. We ate in a cozy silence, broken only by the occasional clink of a butter knife or the crunch of a crust. Then, out of nowhere, Chloe asked, "Do you think people ever really change?" I paused, chewing. I think people can change, but most just rearrange their furniture and call it a renovation. She snorted. That's disturbingly accurate. "Why do you ask?" She hesitated, eyes drifting toward the window. "Peter called me last night." "Oh." He said Dad's been moody lately, snapping at everyone, accusing Mom of not being supportive. I nodded slowly. That sounds familiar. And Peter said something else. She shifted in her chair. He said I ruined everything because I encouraged you to move. That if I just kept quiet, you'd still be their fallback plan. "Fallback plan?" I repeated. "That's generous of them." She looked at me, eyes soft with guilt. I didn't mean to cause trouble. "You didn't cause it. Chloe, you just turned on the light in a room that had been dark for too long." There was something healing in that, naming the dysfunction without pretending it was normal. We'd all played our roles for too long. Me as the quiet, useful matriarch, them as the put-together suburban success story, but it was a stage play, and someone had finally called cut. That afternoon, we wandered downtown, ducking into small shops with crooked shelves and chatty owners. At an antique bookstore, I found a 1954 copy of The Sea Around Us by Rachel Carson. Chloe found a vintage film camera for $45 and haggled it down to $30 with the kind of bold charm I never had at her age. As we left the store, she nudged me, still thinking about Paris. "Every minute," I said, "though I'll need to get a passport first." "We should apply together," she said. "Make it a thing." And so we did. Monday morning, we stood in line at the post office, paperwork in hand. The clerk was a woman about my age with shock white hair pulled into a tidy bun and eyeliner sharp enough to cut glass. "Traveling together?" she asked, glancing between us. "Yep," Chloe said. "Europe." "Ah, adventure," the clerk smiled. "Good for you two." As she stamped our forms, she looked at me and said something that stuck. "Too many people wait until it's too late to see the world. Don't be one of them." When we got home, I sat down at my laptop and pulled up a folder I'd created weeks ago, Dream Itinerary. It was filled with clippings, notes, links to travel blogs. I'd been building it slowly, secretly, since the day I signed the check but decided not to give it away. Now, it was time to actually use it. Chloe and I spent the afternoon planning, giggling like schoolgirls. We chose Paris, Venice, and Dubrovnik, 3 cities, 1 month, one chance to live like people in those glossy magazines I used to fold the corners of. "I've been thinking," Chloe said as she traced our route on Google Maps. "After the trip, maybe I'll transfer to a journalism school, one that focuses on photojournalism." "You'd be good at it," I said without hesitation. "And maybe I'll pitch a photo essay about women starting over late in life." "Like me?" I asked with a raised brow. "Exactly like you." Later that week, a letter arrived from Peter. Typed, not handwritten, too formal, too stiff. "Grandma, I know we haven't always gotten along, and I said some things I shouldn't have. I was out of line. I guess I didn't realize how much you meant to me until you were gone. I'm sorry. Peter." There was no request for money, no hint at an agenda. It was short, maybe even sincere. I read it twice, then tucked it into the drawer next to June's letter. Small cracks in the facade. Maybe time really does soften even the most stubborn stone. Friday night, Chloe and I invited a few neighbors over for a low-key garden evening. We grilled vegetables, played Ella Fitzgerald on the speaker, and passed around a chilled bottle of rosé. Frank brought his infamous carrot cake. Margaret arrived with a jar of homemade marmalade. Elizabeth brought a photo album and insisted on showing us black and white pictures from when she was a lounge singer in New York. "You had a life before this?" Chloe asked in awe. Elizabeth winked. "Darling, I had several." The night buzzed with laughter and soft light. Fireflies blinked lazily in the hedges. Someone lit a citronella candle. It was perfect. At one point, I looked around and realized I wasn't lonely anymore. Not because I had a big family gathering around me, but because I had chosen to build something better, slower, real. Later, as I tucked a blanket around Chloe on the couch, she whispered, "I think I'll remember this night forever." "I hope you do," I said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. As I settled into bed, I thought of all the lives we live inside one lifetime, the versions of ourselves we become and leave behind, and how sometimes the best chapters are the ones no one expected us to write. The following morning, the garden was damp with the dew, and the air had that clean, soft scent of cut grass and new beginnings. I sat on the porch swing with my coffee, swaying gently as the early sun climbed over the maple trees. Chloe had already left for campus, texting me a sleepy "see you after class" and a heart emoji. She was staying the weekend again, and I wasn't about to question why. I just liked having her close. Around 9:15, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. "Hello?" "Is this Mrs. Ivy Caldwell?" A man's voice. Calm, professional. Probably 40s, maybe 50s. "This is she." "My name is Nathan Fox. I'm an attorney with Fox and Weller. We represent Richard Howard." I froze. The name sliced through me like a breeze from a half-forgotten dream. Richard Howard. My heart, the one I thought had long moved on, gave a jolt. "May I ask, what is this about?" I said, my voice too steady for the chaos inside. "I understand this is unexpected," he said gently. "Mr. Howard passed away 2 weeks ago in Boston. His estate is in probate, and you were listed in a sealed letter he left with his will." I didn't speak. I couldn't. "Would you be willing to receive a copy of the letter? It's personal in nature." "Of course," I whispered. He promised to email it by day's end. After hanging up, I sat motionless, staring at the mug in my hand. My coffee had gone cold. It had been over 5 decades since I last saw Richard. He left Southport without a word. I never told him I was pregnant. I raised Grant on my own, built a life out of sheer determination, grit, and mathematical equations. He never came back. Until now. That afternoon, the email arrived, a PDF, 1 page. I clicked it open with trembling fingers. "Ivy, if you're reading this, then I've finally run out of time and words I should have said long ago. I've thought about you every year since I left Vermont. Every time I walked past a library, I thought of that spring and your red notebook full of equations. I should have stayed. I know that now. I never knew if you kept the baby. I was a coward and didn't ask. But if you did, if there's a child, I want to say I'm sorry for not being there. And I hope you know it wasn't because I didn't care. I just didn't believe I was worth much back then. I left a small sum for you in my will. It's not much, but it's a thank you. For your kindness, for your strength, for that spring. I hope you had a good life, and I hope you found love, even if it wasn't with me. Yours, Richard. By the time I reached the end, my eyes were filled with tears I hadn't expected. It wasn't sorrow. It wasn't even regret. Really. It was closure. A door gently, finally closed after being left ajar for far too long. Chloe walked in just as I was wiping my eyes. "Hey," she said, dropping her bag. "Everything okay?" I handed her the letter. She read it silently, then looked at me with wide, soft eyes. "Is this Grandpa?" I nodded, "The one your dad never met." "Wow," she breathed. "Did you love him?" "I think I did," I said slowly. "Or maybe I loved the idea of him." We sat quietly for a moment, both of us processing in our own ways. Then Chloe leaned her head on my shoulder. "You deserve good things. Grandma, even from ghosts." I laughed through the lump in my throat. That might be the most poetic thing anyone said to me all year. A week later, a certified letter arrived from the law office. Richard had left me $25,000, just like that. No strings, no expectations, just a gift from the past. I used $5,000 of it to finally book the trip to Paris. Flights, a boutique hotel near Montmartre, a small group photography tour for Chloe, and a watercolor class for me. We would leave in 2 months. That weekend, I hosted another garden gathering, this time with a twist. I invited a few new faces, Claire from the library, who always wore oversized hats, Dennis, the retired postman who knew everyone's business, and a surprise guest, June, my old friend from the school district who had moved to Maine years ago and happened to be visiting. When June walked into my garden, arms outstretched, I felt like I was 20 again. "You look radiant," she exclaimed. "You look exactly the same," I said, half laughing, half crying. We talked like no time had passed about our students, our disappointments, and our quiet triumphs. When she heard I was traveling to Europe with my granddaughter, she beamed. "You always had dreams bigger than this town," she said. Maybe I just needed to live long enough to catch up to them. That night, as I lay in bed, a memory surfaced, one I hadn't touched in years. It was from the week after I'd learned I was pregnant. I was sitting in the empty classroom after hours, staring at the chalkboard, wondering what the hell I was going to do. I'd been terrified, alone, 25. But I remembered thinking, if I can teach algebra to teenagers, I can figure out how to raise one of my own. And I did. I raised a boy who became a man. I endured the condescension, the whispered judgments, the loneliness. And now, all these years later, I'd found a way to rewrite the ending, not for anyone else, but for myself. Paris was just the beginning. The days leading up to our trip felt like the week before Christmas, when I was a child full of lists, excitement, and the soft hum of anticipation. Chloe and I had started a shared Google Doc titled Paris Plans, where she typed in places she wanted to photograph: hidden gardens, old bookstores, street musicians, and I added watercolor class dates and tiny cafes known for perfect croissants. She stayed at my house more often now, not because she needed anything, but because we genuinely liked being around each other. It was quiet companionship. Two women, separated by decades, yet tethered by something unspoken. One afternoon, while we were folding laundry, she looked up from a pair of jeans and said, "You know, I told Mom I'm not going back to school this fall." I paused mid-fold, a cotton blouse resting in my hands. "How'd that go?" She cried. Then she threatened to stop paying my phone bill. "Did you tell her why?" "I tried," she said, sighing. "Told her I didn't want to live someone else's idea of my life, that I needed to figure things out for myself. She said I was being dramatic." "You kind of are," I teased gently, but in a good way. She smirked. "Thanks." "Did she mention your father?" "Oh, yeah. He said I'd regret throwing away such a practical opportunity. You know, the usual motivational speech." I sat beside her. "Do you regret it?" She shook her head. "Not even a little. I feel free. Scared, but free." I nodded. "That's how you know you're making your own decisions." She tilted her head. "Is that how you felt when you decided to keep Dad?" A little stunned. I smiled, terrified, but it also felt right. Like my bones would break if I did anything else. There it was, one of those old age insights slipping out without warning. We talked about fear, freedom, and expectations until the sun dipped below the windowsill and our tea had gone lukewarm. The morning of the flight arrived with a kind of stillness. I woke up before the alarm, watched the sun roll across the floorboards, and breathed in the familiar scent of chamomile and old books. By 7:30 a.m., Chloe was zipping her suitcase shut with both feet planted on the top of it. "Is this how real travelers do it?" she asked. "No," I laughed. "Real travelers pack less." At the airport, while waiting at the gate, she looked at me with wide, grateful eyes. "I can't believe we're actually doing this." "Me neither," I said. "But sometimes, the best decisions are the ones you never thought you'd be brave enough to make." The flight was long and uneventful, peppered with shared snacks, a couple of rom-coms, and a healthy amount of seat shuffling. Chloe took 100 photos out the airplane window. I sketched the cloud line on a napkin with a pen I found in the bottom of my purse. We landed in Paris late afternoon local time, both of us sticky-eyed and running on sheer adrenaline. Our hotel was charming, not the Ritz, thank God, but the kind of place where the floors creak just enough and the concierge knows every cat in the alley by name. We dropped our bags, freshened up, and walked to a corner cafe with twinkling lights strung across the awning. The waiter greeted us with a smile that could have melted chocolate. "I already love this place," Chloe whispered as she looked at the menu. "Me too," I said, "and I haven't even tried the bread." That night, after dinner, we wandered, no agenda, just the two of us. Under the Parisian moonlight, the air was cool and smelled like tobacco, perfume, and possibility. Chloe snapped photos while I memorized shadows. We crossed the Pont Neuf Bridge, where couples were attaching locks and tossing keys into the Seine. I read somewhere, Chloe said, that they started removing the locks because they were weighing the bridge down. Romance with consequences, I mused. That's a metaphor, if I've ever heard one. She giggled and looped her arm through mine. We sat on a bench and watched the water roll past, the kind of deep, slow current that makes you forget how quickly time moves. Grandma, Chloe said quietly, do you ever wish things had gone differently? I turned to her, studying her soft features, the faint freckles across her nose, sometimes. I admitted, but not tonight. Not here. Another offbeat fact popped into my head. You know, in the 1800s, Parisian sewer workers used to be paid more than teachers. Chloe blinked. Seriously? Yep, because their job was considered more dangerous, which, I suppose, depends on how rowdy your students are. We laughed until the lights blurred and the sky deepened into ink. Walking back to the hotel, I felt younger than I had in years. Not because of the city, but because I'd stopped waiting for life to knock. I'd opened the door myself. As we tucked in that night, Chloe in her bed, me and mine, I whispered across the room, let's go to Montmartre tomorrow. You read my mind. The last thing I saw before sleep took me was the moon through the cracked curtain, hanging low and silver over Paris. It was just the beginning. We woke up to the smell of buttery croissants drifting through the open window and the soft chime of church bells in the distance. I stretched like an old cat in the sun and smiled to myself. Paris, not a dream, not a fantasy. We were actually here. Chloe was already up, sitting cross-legged on her bed, editing photos on her laptop. Look at this one, she said, spinning the screen toward me. It was a photo she'd taken last night, standing on the Pont Neuf, backlit by the golden glow of the street lamps. My face was turned upward, lit in profile. I looked peaceful, almost cinematic. That woman looks like she knows exactly who she is, I said, almost surprised. Chloe grinned. She does. We spent the morning wandering through Montmartre. The cobbled streets wound around pastel houses with ivy clinging to their shutters. Artists set up their easels in the square, painting portraits and landscapes in soft oils and sharp charcoals. I stopped to watch one man capture the shadow of the Sacré-Cœur with long, confident strokes. I think I used to dream in places like this, I said softly. Chloe looked up from her camera, and now you're living in one. We stopped at a little cafe for espresso and pain au chocolat. Chloe was telling me about a famous photographer who shot only in black and white when a woman at the table next to us leaned over. Excuse me, she said in a light French accent, but are you American? Yes, I nodded. Vermont, originally. Ah, I visited once. It is very green, very quiet. We chatted for a few minutes. Her name was Claudine. She was a retired history professor who now gave walking tours on the weekends just for fun. Somehow, we got on the topic of aging and freedom. You know, Claudine said, sipping her coffee, in France, we don't fear age so much. We see it as a layer, not a loss. I loved that. A layer, not a loss. There it was, another insight from old age wisdom, this time borrowed, and it nestled into my chest like a warm stone. After lunch, we visited the Musée de la Vie Romantique. Chloe got lost in the exhibits while I lingered in the garden, sketching the wrought iron chairs and the way the light caught the leaves above them. A woman about my age sat down beside me. I'm trying to learn to draw, she said, watching me scribble. Me too, I smiled. It was a simple exchange, but it reminded me that it's never too late to begin. That part of the magic of travel, especially as an older woman, is how invisible rules melt away. You don't need to be young or fluent or flawless. You just have to be curious. We spent the evening on a river cruise down the Seine, sipping wine and watching the city flicker to life as the sun dipped behind the skyline. You know what's strange, Chloe said, leaning on the railing beside me. What? I don't feel like I'm running away anymore. I feel like I'm finding. I wrapped an arm around her. That's the difference. Sweetheart, escape is fear. Discovery is courage. She nodded and snapped a photo of the Eiffel Tower lighting up. Here's something quirky for you during World War II. The French cut the elevator cables of the Eiffel Tower so Hitler would have to climb the stairs if he wanted to reach the top. He never did. Power move, Chloe said when I told her. We returned to the hotel exhausted but content. As I pulled the covers over me, Chloe whispered, "Thank you for bringing me." I smiled into the dark. "Thank you for coming." Over the next few days, we explored Paris the way one explores a favorite book slowly, deliberately, savoring every detail. We visited the catacombs a little spooky, the opera house utterly breathtaking, and a bookstore where I found a first edition of a French poetry collection I'd loved in college. Each night, we returned to the hotel with aching feet and full hearts. One morning, while Chloe slept in, I took a walk alone. The streets were quiet, damp from a light overnight rain. I bought a small bouquet of lavender from an elderly woman on the corner and sat on a bench in the Jardin de Luxembourg. A man with a kind smile and a wrinkled newspaper sat beside me. We didn't speak, just nodded politely and shared the space. I thought about how many years I'd spent alone in my apartment, convinced that silence meant isolation. But here among strangers, in a city that didn't even speak my language, I'd never felt more accompanied. When I returned to the hotel, Chloe was awake and sitting by the window, journal in hand. "I've been writing," she said, "about us, about this trip. Is it any good?" "I think so. Might even submit something to the campus literary magazine. If they don't hate me too much for dropping out." "They'll get over it," I said, "and if they don't, they weren't your people." That afternoon, we took a cooking class, learned to make coq au vin from a woman named Brigitte, who had zero tolerance for laziness but kept slipping us extra wine. I haven't laughed that hard in years. That night, as we packed up our things for the train ride to Lyon the next day, Chloe looked over at me and said, "I feel like I'm going to remember every second of this forever." "I hope you do," I whispered, "and I hope you keep chasing moments like this." We left Paris just after dawn, boarding a sleek train headed southeast to Lyon. The windows framed a blur of lavender fields, sleepy villages, and rolling hills stitched in rows of vines. Chloe sat across from me, earbuds in, sketching in her journal. I sipped tea and tried not to cry. Not out of sadness, but out of something else, a blend of pride, relief, and something resembling joy, the kind that feels earned, like finding warmth after a long winter. Lyon was quieter than Paris, less polished, maybe, but more intimate. We stayed in a little bed and breakfast run by an elderly couple, Etienne and Mireille, who treated us like family. Mireille wore pearls with her apron. Etienne had a mustache that curled like punctuation on a letter you forgot to send. "Bienvenue chez nous," they'd said at the door, and I believed them. For a few days, it really did feel like home. Our days were slow. Mornings meant markets' crates of peaches, wheels of cheese, bouquets of sunflowers as big as Chloe's head. Afternoons meant naps or museums. Evenings meant wine and conversation, sometimes with the other guests, sometimes just the two of us. One evening, Etienne invited us to the garden for aperitifs. Chloe was chatting with another traveler about vintage cameras when Mireille sat beside me. "You and your granddaughter," she said with a smile. "You remind me of me and my own grandmother." "Oh." "Yes, she was fierce, took no nonsense, but she had this soft center only showed it when no one was watching." "Sounds familiar," I chuckled. Mireille leaned in a little. "It is good, I think, that she sees you like this. Not as someone they tuck away and visit twice a year, but as someone who still lives." That struck a chord, and for the rest of the evening, I watched Chloe laugh and talk and toast strangers and thought, yes, this is how I want her to remember me. Here's your quirky fact for the day. The city of Lyon has over 400 secret passageways called traboules, built in the Renaissance to protect silk merchants and now used by savvy locals to shortcut through the city. We found a few ourselves, thanks to a little map Etienne sketched on a napkin. Every time we stepped into one of those winding alleys, it felt like slipping through time, like life had hidden doors, if you just knew where to press. One morning, as we walked along the Saône River, Chloe asked me, "Do you think you'll ever go back?" I knew she meant the life I had before, the apartment, the Sunday phone calls, the waiting. I shook my head gently. I don't think I was ever truly there at Chloe, not really. She didn't press me, just linked her arm through mine and rested her head briefly on my shoulder. On our last night in Lyon, we climbed the hill to Fourvière Basilica from the terrace. The entire city stretched out beneath us in golden light. Bells rang out below. A warm breeze swept past us. "This is the kind of moment," Chloe whispered, "where you know you'll remember the smell of it." I smiled. "You've got the soul of a poet." She grinned. "You've got the bank account of a retired rogue investor." We both laughed, but it was true. I still had most of the money, and I'd already decided what I wanted to do with it. Later that night, back at the B&B, I logged into my account and sent 2 transfers, one to a scholarship fund at South Burlington High for girls pursuing STEM degrees, and one to a shelter in Montpellier for women starting over. The rest I'd save, not for emergencies, for experiences, for choices, for freedom. Chloe and I talked late into the night, curled up in our pajamas. "I'm scared," she said at one point, "to go back and tell Dad I'm changing majors, that I might take a semester off." "That's okay," I told her. "Bravery doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do it anyway." "Is that your old age wisdom for the day?" "Maybe," I said, "or maybe I stole it from Oprah. Who knows?" We laughed again that night. We fell asleep with the windows open, the scent of wisteria drifting in, the hum of the city just below us. The next morning, we packed our bags and said our goodbyes. Etienne slipped a small jar of homemade fig jam into my purse for sweet memories. He said, At the train station, Chloe stood beside me, waiting for our ride back to Paris. "You know, Grandma," she said softly, "you changed my life." "No," I whispered. "I just reminded you it was yours to begin with." The train arrived, we boarded, the world kept turning. And me, I was no longer invisible. The world outside my window moves quietly now, soft wheels on pavement, the murmur of morning bird song, distant voices wrapped in the hush of early light. I sit by the glass with a cup of tea, still warm, and let my mind drift like steam. What a strange, beautiful thing this life has turned out to be. For years, I thought my story was finished, just footnotes and routines, memories shelved like old books no one opens, but I was wrong. So deeply, wonderfully wrong. At 77, I discovered that life doesn't end, it shifts. The roles change, the scenery evolves, and if you're brave or just stubborn enough, you can write new chapters that don't look like the old ones at all. I've walked through cities I only once saw in books. I've shared secrets over croissants. I've laughed until tears spilled and cried without shame. I've stood on terraces, on bridges, in gardens that smelled like time and possibility. I've watched my granddaughter blossom beside me, not into someone new, but into someone free. There's something I've learned. If you'll indulge a bit of grandmotherly wisdom, you don't need anyone's permission to reclaim your life. You don't need applause or understanding. Just a whisper inside that says, "Not yet, I'm not done." That whisper is more powerful than any inheritance, louder than fear, steadier than time. So if you're sitting in the dark tonight, wondering if it's too late, let me tell you gently, it's not. You're not. We are all still becoming. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you're still awake, I hope you're resting easy. And if you're dreaming, let those dreams be big, bright, and unashamed. There's more ahead, always. Stay close, more stories are coming soon.